Welcome to Action on Pain, a podcast dedicated to highlighting the significant efforts underway in Canada to address chronic pain.
By presenting perspectives from individuals who live with pain, researchers, clinicians, and other stakeholders, we explore various impacts on people's lives and the initiatives, research endeavors, and the committed professionals working to effect meaningful change.
This work is guided by Health Canada's Action Plan for Pain. Join us as we raise awareness and share stories that are shaping the future of pain management in Canada. Today, we are absolutely thrilled to welcome Linda Wilhelm and Jacques Laliberté. Linda Wilhelm is the president of the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance, a virtual, grassroots, patient-driven, independent national organization with members across Canada. She frequently participates in Health Canada expert advisory panels and conferences concerning access and drug safety issues. She is the former member of the Expert Advisory Committee for Vigilance of Health Products, the CAIHR Drug and Safety and Effectiveness Network Steering Committee, and a former member of the Canadian Pain Task Force. Jacques is the former director of AQDC, which is Quebec Province Pain Patient Association, and was a volunteer CEO until 2015. He served on many volunteer business boards and chronic pain committees and organizations. Jacques was the co-chair for the executive committee of the Chronic Pain Network from 2016 to 2023, and was also member of the Canadian Pain Task Force. We are so eager today to hear your insights and experiences relating to your work on the incredible Canadian Pain Task Force, the education for all of those impacted by persistent pain. It is such a pleasure to welcome both of you today, Linda and Jacques.
Happy to be here.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. Maybe I should begin by giving you a little bit more of a background because you don't get to be a member of the Canadian Pain Task Force on pain just like that. For myself, 20 years ago, I can say that I knew nothing about chronic pain. But I had a very bad snowboard accident and was bedridden for about 6 months and understood what a cervical epidural could do to me because my doctor said that if they missed, I would be paraplegic. But I asked if there was any pain with that, and they said no. So I already thought that that was a good deal. So I got the epidural, and I was fine. But then they asked me if I was going to participate in the creation of the Quebec Pain Patient Association. And I said, if you make me feel better, you've got me for life. And that's exactly what's happening. I'm now 80 years old, and I'm still participating, as you can see. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Linda so she can give us a little bit of a background, because her association started before ours, or the one that I was involved with.
Amazing. We will pass it to Linda. And I just wanted to say, that's amazing. And with all experiences, you have advocates and educators in it. This is great to tell us, exactly how you became involved. And Linda, please.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm actually one of the founding members of the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance, and we were formed in 2002, and we've been around for a while. I actually live with rheumatoid arthritis, a very severe, aggressive form of the disease. I was diagnosed when I was 23 years old. So now I'm 65. So it's been a really long journey. And of course, with the 1983, the treatments were very different than they were now. So I didn't respond to the older treatments and was left with a lot of joint damage. I've had 14 total joint replacements or fusions. Actually, I've been told 15. I had one twice. So 15 total joint replacements and fusions. And of course, so left with chronic pain. And I was prescribed opioids for many years. And then when I started working with the Chronic Pain Research Network and seeing some of the evidence about their long-term effectiveness, I decided to do a taper. But since there's no pain clinic in New Brunswick, I was pretty much doing it on my own because my doctor kind of said, well, what do you want to do that for? And so I spent 2.5 years working through an opioid taper, and I got down to, from about 290 milligrams to down to 60 milligrams at night now. So, it's been quite a journey, but I wouldn't recommend it for anybody to try on their own.
You're so brave.
Wow.
Both of you have so much leadership experience in the area of advocacy, and it's so impressive. And I know that we could talk about each of your experiences in its own podcast, and maybe we will, hopefully not too distant future.
Yes.
For today, I'm wondering if you could take that experience and help us understand your experience in working on the Canadian Pain Task Force and what impact that had, or you believe that it's having, on the treatment of pain.
I might go first. I know that,
Yeah.
for policy-wide, we've been trying for many, many years to get some attention to chronic pain. And the opioid crisis happened, and then the government started listening. So I remember going to the arthritis community and saying, government really is kind of interested in pain now. Maybe we should try to approach them about some of the pain, but they couldn't get their community together. The chronic pain community had no problem coming together over this. And it was so amazing to see, because people think that, oh, you got a Canadian Pain Task Force. That was nice of the government. Well, no, they didn't just decide to be nice and give us a pain task force. This was result of 20 years or more of work by a lot of people. And a lot of people working individually and independently who didn't even know there were other people trying to get the same thing. So, it really came together, and it was so very exciting to be part of it, to see, the build up to it, and to see government respond, and to see the formation of the task force and the announcement. It was incredible.
I think that's incredible. Before we pass for Jacques, I just want to say it's incredible. You're talking about 20 years of experience behind it. And this is why it's so important with us to have this podcast, to bring highlights to all these things that have made this happen, and all our wonderful advocates like you both who have made this happen.
Great points, Virginia.
Interestingly enough, we had that opioid crisis, and it's still on, I guess, in many ways. As far as I'm concerned, the opioid crisis, which is something that we don't wish on anybody,
No.
led the federal government to hold a opioid symposium in 2018, and to which we ended up being invited as participants, and because we were already having talks with the federal government and Health Canada. So I guess that all of this is coming about from the background, but the idea is that it led to being invited to the symposium, or the patients and the people informed about chronic pain made such an impression on Jeanette Taylor, who was then Minister of Health, that she, at the end of the conference or symposium, said that she was going to do something about that. And you know what? 6 months later, that's when the task force was formed.
That's amazing.
And I wanted you to know that 6 months for any government and the federal government, it's a hell of a turnaround, and a great
Very
one.
impressive.
Yeah.
So from a crisis situation, we ended up being able to get a voice, and a very important one that led to the formation of the task force. Now, without going to the back scenes, because a lot of that happens like that, but I would tell you that I had lots of conversations with some of the people that are on the task force or were on the task force. And then at one point in time, I was having conversations with Maria Spitz and Fiona Campbell. And when I found out that they had accepted to be co-chairs together, and I was trying to induce one or the other to take over the presidency, the chairmanship, they ended up saying yes, both of them. When I found that out, I knew we were in business. And then the formation of the task force started, and with the federal government, and with Maria and Fiona. And the task force was formed. My biggest impression on that, and what I should tell you right off the bat, is that it was just amazing to see us 8 people gelled together very quickly.
Fabulous.
We all had one goal in mind, was pain. And if you center all the effort around one subject and one goal, and was to make make the goal of pain being recognized as a public health priority, and that was one of our main goals at the beginning, which gelled us all together and to work as a team.
You know what's incredible about hearing that? Well, on so many levels, but what's crossing my mind is the two of you, people with lived pain experience and a tremendous amount of leadership experience leading up to that time. And here you were, 2 out of 8, representing the country in developing this report.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, I felt that responsibility because there are a lot of people in this country living with chronic pain. And how do you represent so many people? It was such a burden of responsibility that I felt. I mean, when add to Jacques, I mean, you know, what he said about this 2018 conference, we've been trying to get invited to that conference. It was a biannual conference that had been going on for a number of years. We tried for years to get invited. Finally, we got invited to 2018 conference. But I'll also say that what happened the night before that conference, the federal health minister, Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor, she held a roundtable with a whole bunch of people with lived experience, as well as our researchers, some clinicians, I'm not sure everybody, but it was a full room. And honestly, I've never seen a minister like that, a high-level minister, there was no time limit. We could have sat there, I'm sure we could have sat there for like 7 or 8 hours and she would have still listened. But we were there
Holy
for
smokes.
3 hours talking to her about what our experiences were of pain in this country and what you know, some of the barriers we were feeling and the pushback. And the other thing at that summit that really struck me is you know, Dr. Robert Strain, who many people remember from COVID. He was a public health or whatever for Nova Scotia. So he's been very vocal about opioids and the harms they've done and was pretty, you know, convinced that we should ban opioids for everybody. He came out of that conference and said, you know, I've really been wrong. He says, I never, ever considered what all these policies would do to people living with chronic pain. So to me, if nothing else had come out of that meeting, that was, to me, I mean, I always look for 2 or 3 big wins at anything, right? And that was the big win, as well as the federal minister announcing that, you know, she was going to do some at the end.
What a powerful example of the person with lived experience voice. Powerful example.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that led to the task force. And like I said before, 6-month turnaround time is really something that is unseen usually. I thought that I just want to add one more thing. All of these 8 people have worked as volunteers. We weren't paid. We have not been paid, and that's fine. And that was not the reason why we wanted to be on the task force. But you can understand that after 20 years, for Linda and I, that was a platform that we couldn't escape or wanted to escape in any way, shape, or form. And we also, I must say, worked through COVID-19. We never stopped. We never stopped. We were doing a lot of Zoom meetings, but and that was fine. But we advanced while a lot of people were on the sidewalk watching the parade go by. We were right in the parade. Hey, Linda.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, we pivoted and we actually got the work done quite quicker than what they had anticipated. I think almost 6 months or more earlier than what the time.
Earlier
I can remember you.
for the final report, but we had to assess what was going on in the pain world across the country, which we did because we all knew, everybody on the task force knew, and we had lots of discussions and philosophical discussions around pain and treatments and how do we get it recognized and making sure that we would not step on the toes of provincial governments either, because you know we were talking about informing the Canadian government and suggesting ways to improve the condition of the people living with chronic pain through research and better accessibility. But at the end of the day, provincial governments are responsible to do that. So we wanted to make sure that while we were developing those guidelines, if I can call it like that, for the sake of the discussion, we wanted to make sure that we weren't doing things or saying things that would not support also the provincial efforts that for a lot of provinces were up and coming or coming later, and some were a little earlier.
Oh, and how to leverage that, right? If we saw something like BC was doing some amazing work, then we wanted to leverage that to say, hey, New Brunswick, how come you can't get your act together, right? So it was a lot of that going on as well.
Mhm.
So I want to take a moment here. I want to give you guys, the time to really give us your high level but important snapshot of the work of the task force. But what's not lost on me, as you've just shared with us, and it's the irony is not lost on me. This terrible event of the opioid crisis, or whatever we want to call it, we can have a whole other podcast about what that really means for those that live in pain. That was able to be leveraged into something good, and you were part of that something good. And so, it's been really interesting to hear how it's gotten to this point. But I think we're really interested in hearing sort of your takeaways and some of that insight, that behind the curtain stuff that many of us didn't see in that amazing short period of time that the task force worked through all of those challenges to lead to that action plan. So I'd love to hear the things that you can share with us that many of us don't know.
And I wanted to add to that, Keith, one thing. What were your thoughts when you were invited to be part of it?
Well, I've told you, and I'm going to repeat that. When I found out that Maria Spit and Fiona Campbell were going to be co-chairs, I knew we were going to be in business because I had a lot of confidence in them. And I'm
Right.
sure Linda felt the same way. The other thing is that, if you recall there, we were talking about 20 years. So a lot of us knew each other already, with a few more additions that we did not know very well, but that gelled right within the group very quickly. And we quickly determined what we needed to do. First of all, we knew that 8 people was not sufficient in order to get into the subject. So we decided very quickly, from an organizational point of view, to have a committee of experts that would be able to influence our ways, tell us where we were right, where we were wrong. And so we ended up with a consultation committee of about 15 experts from all fields across the country. And we met with them on a quarterly basis, I think, or twice a year, something like that. Maybe it was twice a year.
For me, when I first found out that I was being considered for the task force, because you had to be vetted, and there were, so when they asked me, I was terrified because I thought, how am I ever going to represent everybody with chronic pain on this task force? I mean, like I said earlier, the responsibility was just almost overwhelming. And then, of course, there were the detractors. There were the criticizers that, oh, all you want to do is take away opioids from everybody. You're going to kill people. And, oh, my goodness, we didn't like that first report because you said this or you said that. Or, everybody should have, access to opioids. And it was that kind of situation. And you had to listen because this was a government task force. So you're trying, to do the work, but also you have this criticism in the background that, you're always questioning whether you're doing a good enough job. And that's kind of how I felt, but I just, we pushed ahead with it. And then I'm just going to say right now that there's been a paper published recently in the Cambridge Journal of Law, Medicine, and Ethics that criticizes the task force and really says that, we ignored issues of equity with people who have substance use issues. And, I'm thinking, okay, but, people with chronic pain, we were shut out for so long when the government was just focused completely on substance issues. And, so there's always this push and pull and this criticism of what you're doing. And I mean, in some ways it's good because then you can reflect and make sure that you are doing the right thing for people living with pain, right? But otherwise, there's some noise kind of going on there in the background as well. And people who were upset because they were not picked to be on the task force, saying like, why was that person picked? What does she got to do, right?
Oh boy. That added to the complications, no doubt, to like an already massive task that the task force was taking on. And so I can only imagine that would have been a difficult thing to deal with for everyone on the task force, and certainly from your standpoint. But, in terms of, you were asked to come and join the task force and vetted, like you said, and then became a formal member of the task force. And then would you say, Linda, that you're seeing the benefits being reaped in terms of the benefits of the task force, is what I'm trying to say? Like, what do you see that impact being?
Well, one of my fears always, because I've been doing this for a long time, is that we do this wonderful report. We did 3 reports, and then it goes and sits on a shelf somewhere and doesn't actually result. So I think as a task force, that was also one of our concerns. We wanted to
Yeah.
make sure, and that's why you hear a lot of action plan and things like that. But we wanted to actually make recommendations. That was also part of the work, that the recommendations we made were actually actionable, and that we
Yeah.
identified which ones would be easier, which ones would be more difficult. So it was, that in that respect, we worked hard to try to make sure that these reports did not. So then shortly after the task force was finished, as once we submitted the last report, then all of a sudden we see, the Office of Pain within Health Canada. So we now have a management team within Health Canada that is totally focused on pain. So I thought, okay, this is great. At least, this is not a report that's going to sit on a shelf. We have JF and we have his team, and we can continue to work with him. And then, of course, we saw Pain Canada, right? So here we are, we got Pain Canada, and now, this all this other work that's building on the work of the task force. So I really was happy about that, because then I thought, okay, all this 2.5 years of work that we did and all the backlash that we got, because we did get backlash. I think I still get the odd email from somebody who might comes across it and then says, how could I have sold out people living with pain like that? And, not, and you still get the nasty emails. And I got quite a few nasty ones even during the task force. So,
Boy.
there was,
So sorry to hear that.
yeah, and it was stressful, because I think when you're living with pain, and I've lived through a lot in my life, I've shared a little bit, but I really haven't shared how really horrible some days were.
Yeah.
And you're trying to use your own experience to help others, and you're the one kind of getting under the gun as well. So it was a little stressful. I remember at one point talking to somebody, or not Jay, it was before JF, Andrea, when Andrea was kind of the person managing it at Health Canada. How hard it was to share your story. Like, when you talk about, when you're at these meetings and you're talking about some of the worst days of your life, and you've got to go back and try to relive that. And then how much does it traumatize you, right? Like re-traumatizes you. And so then they actually, Health Canada offered to get me counseling to help with that. I didn't take them up on it. I'm used to sharing my story and managing, but that's another aspect, right? That it's also impacting your own mental health during a time of a pandemic, where we all know what kind of impact that had on our mental health, when you're immunocompromised and you're scared to go outside, you get COVID and die. So there were a lot of other things going on, right?
Exactly. And it's that whole biopsychosocial and spiritual, really, that whole person is affected by pain, and clearly, based on your experience, affected by the experience of being on the task force and everything, that responsibility that came with it. Fascinating insight. And Jacques, would you be able to share what you think the progress has been with the Canadian Pain Task Force and the action plan for pain in Canada, through your lens as a person with lived experience, through your lens with tremendous leadership experience and advocacy, and also just in terms of the impact you feel it's had?
The recommendations presented for the action, there were 153 recommendations, I think, in detail, but the action plan for Canada 2021, the report, is online. And for anybody interested in having all the details, you can go and read this document. But at the end of the day, what we wanted to do was really to enable coordination, collaboration, and leadership across the country. And I think that we've achieved that very much so. And we've been able to improve the access in some areas a little faster than others, but equitable and patient-centered pain care. And we were trying to increase awareness and be very considerate for population disproportionately impacted by pain. So we were very careful about that. And I think that is doing a little bit of progress as well. It doesn't move very fast, and it's certainly from a guy who comes from the business world. I'm an impatient patient, let me say, and so it never goes fast enough for me. But interestingly enough, I think that we did make some strides. I think that the government made some strides as well, because the secretariat that we had did a fantastic job. They were very supportive. They didn't tell us where to go, but we could ask sometimes if it was all right to move in that direction or in that direction a little bit in order to sell better what we're trying to do, because we were also aware that we'd end up talking to people that were not necessarily living with pain. So the idea is that you have to grab their attention somehow. And we did some numbers as well. And I think, Linda, you will remember, I think we were talking about $40 billion a year to make it a round number. So $40 billion a year is a lot of money. If we can improve the access for pain patients, that means they won't go back to the clinic or to the hospital and because they don't feel right on a Saturday night when the staff is lower. So the idea is that we wanted to do all of these things, all of those things, all at the same time. It's not all moving in the same direction, but following the task force and the recommendations, we took in our hands also to create Pain Canada, which from a patient or a professional point of view, not government, we created Pain Canada, which is a hell of a great portal, and for people to be able to access. It's, of course, bilingual, so in French is Douleur Canada, and people can access that in order to get even more information and be up to date with what's happening in the pain world. But we wanted to increase awareness, education, specialized training in pain. I think a lot of this is moving forward, a little too slow for my liking, but considering that I'm already 80, so I'd like to see some very fascinating results a lot faster than some people that are only 40. But when you suffer from chronic pain, I'll tell you, fast is not fast enough.
Right. Yeah.
It's not fast enough.
Yeah.
And I think about, just as you were talking about that, and things are advancing, and the $40 billion a year, I'm thinking, wouldn't it be amazing if we could wave a magic wand and have, I look forward to the time that we've reached our 6 goals have been accomplished. The 152 recommendations have been checked off and accomplished. Imagine that world and the impact on that cost, and more importantly, the impact on the individuals living with pain.
I have read an action for pain for Australia that they did a few years back, and they were talking about a 4-to-1 return on investment, which may not apply to us. But at $40 billion a year in expenses, if we can only improve by a few percentage points every year, that would be already great, and we would get a return on investment that could be quite interesting. From a business point of view, I'll tell you that I'd jump on that tomorrow morning.
That is an excellent point. And with that, we could talk to you both for another hour, but we're going to have to wrap this one up. But there's things that have come up today where I'm pretty sure we're going to want to follow up with you and have more conversations. So on behalf of my colleagues here, we just want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us about all the work you've done individually over the years, and then the great work that you did together on that little task force, because it was a small but mighty group that led to this action plan. So we're very pleased that you were able to join us today. So thank you very much.
We'd also like to thank all of you for tuning into the Action on Pain podcast. We hope this episode has shed some light on the important work being done in Canada as guided by Health Canada's An Action Plan for Pain in Canada. Until next time.
Thank you for joining us today on Action on Pain. If you enjoyed the discussion, please follow us on your preferred podcast platform to stay updated, and please share with your networks. A 5-star rating and review would help others find our show. Your feedback is important.
This podcast does not contain any medical advice. Please consult with your doctor if you have any questions or concerns.
The Action on Pain podcast is made possible by the generous support of the Chronic Pain Network, a national research and knowledge mobilization network.
The views, opinions, and content shared by hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the Chronic Pain Network or its funders.